Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Tes Vov Amud Aleph, starting with the new Gemara on Daf Yud Dalid Amud Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. Our Mishnah is speaking about the protocol for obtaining the nesachim. In other words, when a person comes to bring a carbon, he needs also to have nesachim, oil and wine and flour that provide also additionally with this carbon. And therefore, the protocol was to go to the Beis HaMikdash, if you would not bring your own, and you then purchase the nesachim. How would you do so? First, by then giving money to the one who was in charge of what's called the chosim. This is Rabbi Yochanan ben Pinchas, the Mishnah had told us. Then, depending on the type of chosim he was buying, he would then give the money, get the token, this chosim, which was essentially a piece of parchment with the signature of Yochanan ben Pinchas. Then subsequently he'd provide that token and give it to Achia, who would then provide him with the nesachim in exchange. The Tanna Kama says there are 4 different nesachim, and therefore 4 different tokens. Ben Azai, he says there are actually 5, and therefore he lists a 5th. The Tanna Kama says there are 4, one of them being the Chayte, referring to the Mitzayra. He's called the Chayte because he got Saras as a result of his Chet. And when Azai says the Chayte is split up into 2. There's the Chayte Dal and the Chayte Oshir. So ask the Gemara right away, Ukiben Azai Chayte Dal Lama. We have the Tanna Kama that says Chayte, it's referring to the Chayte Oshir. That's the one who's the Mitzara. At the end of his term, he must bring 3 karbonos, an Osham, a Chatos, and an Oila. And the Oshir is able to bring so with all 3 of these being Behemois. The Chayte Dal, in contrast, he only brings the animal for an Osham. The other 2, Chatos and Oila, are with birds. So the Gemara asks, why is it that Ben Azai separates the Chayte Dal? Hare, the same nesachim is brought by the Gedi, which is mentioned in the Mishnah as one of the Chaysamois. So why does he then separate out the Chayte Dal? Asks the Gemara. Answers the Gemara, Hayamevi Lugoi Imoy, because he wants that the lug of oil should be provided together with this chosim, and therefore, if you just said chosim gedi, it would not have this lug. In other words, when it comes to the mitzara, in addition to the oil that's provided and put on the mizbeach, there's also some oil that is placed on the person's big thumb, his thumb, the big toe, and also on his right earlobe. So as a result of that additional oil, so therefore he separates the chayte as being a chayte dal. So the Gemara is saying, concludes from this, Baram, obviously, however, Rabbanan mevi gedi, like the Rabbanan, he is indeed, the Rabbanan according to Tanna Kama, he's just bringing the gedi, the chaysim gedi. In other words, because when it comes to the Tanna Kama, he's referring to that chayte who brings his own oil, and therefore he doesn't need to be provided with the oil together with that nesachim. Niskei Rochel ma, asked the Gemara, we don't have listed in our Mishnah Rochel, a female lamb. It's not listed in the Mishnah. And asked the Gemara, then how much would have to be brought? How much nesachim? Says the Gemara, min madetaninon. We can tell you from our own Mishnah. It states, Gedi meshamesh niskei tzoin gedolim v'ketanim zecharim unekevois. Here, it doesn't distinguish between big and small, male and female. Hada amrei niskei rochel ki niskei gedi. And therefore, we can also bring a pasuk to this effect that the niskei rochel will be the same as a niskei gedi. Dichsiv. Kacha yeyaseh l'shor ha'echod. This shall be done for the sole shore, The shore will be one. Oy lo ayil ha'echad, or the one ayil. Oy liseh b'kavasim oy be'izim, or the kid with amongst the lambs or the goats. That's the pasuk. So here the Gemara explains l'shor ha'echad lama nemar. Why do you have to state l'shor ha'echad in this pasuk? We already know before that there's an egel referred to. Why does it separate out and now repeat l'shor echad? Magi shaloi chilek beiniske egel leniske shor. To tell you, there's no distinction between the egel and the shore. The nesachim of the egel, the same amount of the nesachim of the shore. Shahaya bedin came. Bedin, because you might have thought there have been some sort of logic thinking otherwise. Hatzoin ton nesachin uben habakar ton nesachim. The tzoin, the sheep, require nesachim, and also the cattle require nesachim. Imatzunu shechilek bein niskei keves like niskei ayil. If we find a distinction between the nesachim of the lamb and the nesachim of the ram is a 2-year-old. So we'd say on top of Tezvav and Aleph, lekach nechloik ben niskei egel niskei shor. So too will make a difference between a young cow, an egel, and a shor, which is already matured. Therefore, the pasuk indicates in the shor echad that it's the same amount of nesachim as the egel. Magi shalochilak ben niskei egel and niskei shor. Now the Gemara darshans the rest of the pasuk. It says oila ayil lamo nemar. What does it say? Oila ayil shahaya bedin. Because I might have thought the following deduction: im matzanu shechilek ben niskei ben shana leniskei ben shnosayim. If we find there's a distinction between a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old, namely between a keves and an ayil, lekach nachlek ben niskei shnosayim leniskei shalosh. I might also think there's a distinction between a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. Therefore it says only an ayil, which is a 2-year-old or more, is different than the 1-year-old with its nisachim. But a 3-year-old is the same thing as a 2-year-old, is they're both an ayil. The pasuk goes on to then darshan. Why does it say bekevosim? The kid amongst the sheep. Shahaya bedin, because I might deduce im matzanu shechilek ben niskei keves leniskei ayil. There's a distinction between the nesachim that's provided for the korban of a keves versus the korban of an ayil. Lekach nachlek ben niskei kisba leniskei rochel. Therefore, I might also think there's a difference between the female kisba and the rochel, which is younger and older. Therefore, it states the kid amongst the sheep, to say there's no distinction. Finally, the Gemara darshans oy beizim lama nemar. Why did it say oy beizim? Shahaya bedin. Again, I might think with the following deduction: im matzonu shechili ben niskei keves leniskei ayil. If I see there's a distinction between the nesachim amount of nesachim for the keves versus the amount of nesachim for the ayil, lekach nachloik ben niskei gedi niskei tayish. Therefore, I also might conclude there's a difference between the gedi and the he-goat, which is older. Talmud loymar oy beizim. Therefore it says oy beizim. Hekish koten shebeizim legadol shetiyashim, to show there's no distinction between the young and the old of the goats. Maze b'shloishes lugin af ze b'shloish lugin. Just as the young goats require 3 lugin, so too the he-goat, the old tiyashim, also is only 3 lugin. The Gemara now quotes the seif of the Mishnah that when it comes to the chaysim, it says the chaysim was written on it the day in order to then not have problems with ramoim, with people who are going to make deception and perhaps use those chasamois that they may be found or that changed their value and therefore would then cash in. Gemara asks, Haga ba'atzmecha, consider sheziyeg oisa hayoim. Fine, it's true, you're writing the day on the choisem, but how will that prevent the ramai? Hare, he can go ahead and match that day for another day. In other words, good, you're writing Yom Sheni. So he'll wait till 1 week later and cash in on Yom Sheni. Says Gemara, Shem Mishmar Hayo Kostuv Alov. The name of the Mishmar that was written on it as well. And therefore, since there are 24 different mishmaros, so the weekly mishmar, it was written then, and therefore won't have that problem. He can't come back the next week. The Gemara still asks, good. So he's not going to come back the next week, but he'll come back 20, whatever it is, 25 weeks later, he'll come back the next cycle. Says the Gemara, no, Shem Hayoim, Shem Shabbos, Shem Chodesh, Hayakos Valin. The day is written, also the week is written, and also the month is written. For him to wait until it finally gets to the same exact day and month, then and week, that's going to be something that's very difficult to match, and therefore there's not such a concern. Halacha Daled, the next Mishnah, speaks about two lishkois that are in charge of these certain monetary items in the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Mishnah, Shtei lishkois hayu b'mikdash. There are two lishkois in the Mikdash. Achas lishkas hashchashoin. One was called the lishka chashoin, literally of whisper, that was done in a discreet way. It's referring to money, the Mishnah will explain, money that was given for tzedakah in a discreet way. V'achas lishkas hakelim, and one was the lishkas hakelim, or donated kelim to the Beis HaMikdash. Lishkas chashoin yirechet noisnin lesoicha b'chashoy. The lishkas chashoim, those yirechet, they were very careful and medaktek to then give the tzedakah in the most discreet way. They would give their money of tzedakah in this lishka. V'anim b'nei toiv misparnesim mitoicha b'chashoy. And the anim, they would then be misparnes by getting the tzedakah from this lishka. So in other words, this is then preventing the ani from knowing who was the one who was giving it, and also prevents the one who is giving it to know which ani is the one who's taking it, which means it's the most discreet, highest form of tzedakah. Lishkas hakelim komisha hu misnadev kli zorkoi l'soichoi. Anybody who wanted to donate a kli to the Beis HaMikdash, they would put this in this lishka. So it would be trans. Every 30 days, the treasurers, they would then open this lishka and they would determine if this item that was donated has use in the Beis HaMikdash or not. If it has use, great, they'll keep it. If not, then they'll sell it and the proceeds will go to the Bedek HaBayis. Whatever they needed for the Bedek HaBayis, for the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash, they would keep. And the rest they would go ahead and sell, and the proceeds would go to the Bedek HaBayis. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachman, Havu Parnasim. They were communal leaders. Vahavu Nyahavin l'Rabbi Chamo Avui de Rabbi Yoshaya dinner. And they would give a dinner to Rabbi Chamo, the father of Rabbi Yoshaya. V'hu Yohiv le'lecharnin. And he would give it to others. In other words, to prevent the ani, or the anim, from receiving from the communal leaders, which would be uncomfortable, he was a go-between. Rabbi Zechariah Chasni, Rabbi Levi Hayu Hakol Melezin Alov. It says that people were all gossiping and speaking derogatorily against Rabbi Zechariah, the father-in-law of Rabbi Levi. I mean, they would say, Deloit Tzorich V'hu Nosav, he doesn't need tzedakah and yet he's taking. Min the Domach, when he passed away, Badkim ve'eshkechan dahave mefaleg le'lecharnin. They deduced that he was never taking the money for himself, but rather he was apportioning it out to other people. Rabbi Chanina bar Papa have a maflig mitzvah belelia. Rabbi Chanina bar Papa was sensitive to give tzedakah by doing so at night. Chadzman pagabe Rabhoin deruchayo. Chadzimin pagabe Rabhoin deruchayo. One time, the head of the ruchin, of the mazikin that come out at night, approached him. Omar lei, and he said to him, Lo ken alfin Rebbe, lo tosik gvul echo. The ruchin says to Rabbi China bar Papa, Did you not teach us that it says in the Torah, Lo sasig gvul re'echan, as you're trying to correct him and say, this is not your domain. The nighttime is for the mazikin. And therefore, what are you going ahead and doing out at night? At Talmid Chacham, we should remain indoors. Omalei, v'lo ken kosiv. Is it not written, Matam b'seiser yich be'af, when one gives tzedakah in a discreet manner, he turns away wrath. V'hav mistafe minei va'orek min kumoy. It says that the mazikin, the ruach, then ran away from him, and he was scared to then be in his presence. Omar Rabbi Yoina says, based on the following posuk, is medayik. It says in the posuk, he says, Ashrei noisein ledal en ksivka. It doesn't say the words Ashrei noisein ledal. Fortunate is one who gives to the poor person. Elo Ashrei maskil eldal. Rather, fortunate is the one who has seichel. He uses seichel in regards to the poor person. In other words, he gives it in a way that has some sort of thought behind the giving. To do so in the most discreet way, most comfortable way for the receiver. He determines, in terms of looking at the mitzvah of tzedakah, how he should do it. He plans before he goes ahead and gives the money. How would Rabbi Yoina indeed give tzedakah? If he sees an ani who's reputable and who lost his property, we're going to say to him, Beni, my child. He says, because I heard that you're getting an inheritance from another place. Therefore you'll have money. Right now, take from me and you'll pay me back. After he would take, so he then tell the poor person, it's a gift, you don't have to pay me back. He had elderly people in his days. These elderly anim, whatever you would give them from Rosh Hashanah into Yom HaKippurim, they would take. After Yom Kippur, they would no longer take. They said that was already what was budgeted for us. Min hashamayim. Omrin. They said the shasin gabon. The years what we took what was given was already determined for us between Rosh Hashanah and Yom HaKippurim. Na Nehemiah ish shichin poga bo Yerushalmi echad. Nehemiah, the digger of pits, of shichin, of ditches, a Yerushalmi came and he approached him. Omar Lei said to him, Zechei imichade tarnegolta. He said, be zoiche with me. In other words, a form of saying, give me money so I can buy a tarnegoles, so I can eat. He was saying in such a way that he said, you'll be zoiche in the mitzvah of tzedakah. Omar Lei, Nehemiah said to him, Hey lecha to mise the kupad v'zavin kupad v'achlu meis. He said, here, take this money to buy meat. He bought the meat with that money and he died. Nehemiah screamed and he said, Bo v'siptu laharugo shel Nehemiah. He says, come and let's give a hesped to the one who Nehemiah had killed. In other words, he held himself accountable, since apparently the tarnegoles was more expensive than the meat. He gave money for meat. Meanwhile, this ani was used to having tarnegoles, and therefore he was suspect that maybe when he gave him the meat, that caused him to die. Nachum ish gamzu hayamoilich dora in the Beis Chamif. Nachum ish gamzu, he was bringing a gift to his father. The Gemara in Tainis states that there were 3 different donkeys that were laden, one with food, and one with drinks, and one with all different types of megadim. A mukashchin, somebody who had boils all over his body, approached him. on his way to his father-in-law. He said to him, he says, give me some of what you have. He says, when I will return. He didn't see that he was so desperate. And therefore he said, I'm on my way to do a mitzvah, to be mechabe my father-in-law. So therefore, let me go ahead and give the gift to my father-in-law. On my way back, I'll provide him with some things. He returned and he saw that this fellow died. And then Nachum Ish Gamzu, he then said in the presence of this dead person, the eyes, meaning my eyes that saw you and did not provide for you, yistamion, they should become blinded. The hands that did not extend to give you, may they be cut off. The legs that did not run back to provide you earlier, they should be broken. And the Gemara says, indeed, this is what had happened. Rabbi Akiva, his Talmud, came to visit Nachum Ish Gamzu, his Rebbe. By the way, Nachum Ish Gamzu was called Ish Gamzu because he said Gamzu l'toiva. He would say on everything that happened, Gamzu l'toiva. So Akiva came to visit his Rebbe, Nachum Ish Gamzu. And Rabbi Akiva's response was, Oy li shani roya oischa bekach. Woe is to me that I see you in such a state. Omar lei, Nachum Ish Gamzu says to Rabbi Akiva, Oy li she'ein ani roya oischa bekach. Woe is to me that I don't see you in such a state. Omar lei, Rabbi Akiva says, Ma'at miklalani. What is it that you're cursing me? Omar lei, Nachum Ish Gamzu said, Uma'at miva'et b'yisurin. What are you taking Yisurim lightly, as if they're not important? A person needs Yisurim in this world to gain a kapora, shouldn't have Chalila v'chas, terrible punishment in the next world. Rabbi Oshaya Rabbi, the Gemara tells that Oshaya, the great one, have a Rabbi Dibrei Chad Sagi Nuhura. His son had a Rebbe who was blind. V'hava Yolif Ochel Imei B'kol Yom. And therefore he was careful and accustomed to eating with his son's Rebbe. Every day he would eat together with him. One time he had guests, and therefore he didn't sit with his son's Rebbe who was blind. Beramsh, in the evening after the guest left, Solik Legabe, he went to his son's Rebbe who was blind. Omar Lei said to him, Lo yicho is mari alai begin to have a lin urche yomedain. Don't get angry at me because I had guests today. The Amri, I said to myself, the reason why I'm not going to come and have you join us is because the loliv bizu biyakre demari yoime dain. I don't want them to the mizalzil. They should treat you disrespectfully, and therefore I didn't want to then join you together with the guests. Begin kach lo achlis imari yoime dain. Because of this, I didn't eat with you on this day. Or Malay, so the blind Rebbe responds, At piyasta leman de mischami v'lo chami. You have appeased the one who cannot see, but is seen. Dein dechami v'lo mischamim yikab yusoch. The one who sees and it cannot be seen, referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he shall then be appeased by you as well. V'omalei. So now he says to this blind Rebbe, Hada minoloch, where do you know to say such a statement? Such a clever statement? Omarlei, Mary Elizabeth ben Yaakov. The Rebbe Elizabeth ben Yaakov, Ol chad desaginuhu lekarte. He said, a blind person came to his town. Yosav le Rebbe Elizabeth ben Yaakov l'raminei. Rabbi Elizabeth ben Yaakov was sensitive to sit beneath or behind him. The yamun the ilule dahava barnash rabo. That people would say, the emun, the ilule dahava bar nasha rabba, if it wasn't for this person being a great person, this blind person who's visiting, then lo Yosef le Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov l'raminei, then Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov would never sit beneath him. Avdin le parnasa de ikar. They gave him a lot of parnasa, thinking that he's a great man. Omar loin mahu hechin. So the blind man said, what's going on over here? Why Why is it that he received so much money? Amrulay, they said to him, because Rabbi Lesin ben Yaakov, Yosef Lara Minoch, because Rabbi Yosef ben Yaakov sat beneath you, showing that you're a great person, so therefore we all gave a lot of extra money. So the blind man's response was, Vitzoloi Iloi Hadad Silusa. He started davening a tefillah for Rabbi Lesin ben Yaakov. He says, the following tefillah, Ata Gamalta, Chesed Leman de Mischami V'loi Chami. You did chesed with one who is seen, who does not see. Then Dein Dechami V'lo Mischami Yigmol Yasoch Chesed. Then the one who sees and is not seen, referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, may he bestow upon you Chesed.